Welcome. So, this is part of our Silicon Valley and the U.S. government series. Today's conversation is on the evolution of warfare, perspectives from the front line. We'll hear from three individuals who've really spent their careers on the other end of decisions versus just building, funding, and shipping technology. So, we have over here with us today a Medal of Honor recipient, Earl, a Delta Force operator, John, as well as a Navy SEAL team commander, Eric. So if you really think about them as different services, different eras, but one shared mission. I think also the battlefield that each of them stepped onto looks almost nothing like the one that a young operator will step onto next year or in the coming years. And if you also think about how technologies transitioned from compasses and paper maps to network sensors, from analog radios to AI-assisted targeting, and technology on the battlefield has really transformed at incredible speeds. But also at the same time, the warrior ethos has remained the same. And those are some of the themes we'll pull on tonight. So, gentlemen, thank you again for being here today. Let's get started. Maybe we could just start with having each of you discuss. Can you perhaps share a single moment in your career that captures what the battlefield meant for you? What did you have? What didn't you have in the battlefield?
I think the biggest thing for me on the battlefield is we always really trained as a Marine. It was locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. Um, but what really caught me off guard, and you always hear it captured, the fog of war, is I know what I'm doing, but how do I communicate that away from me to everyone else? We start a battle with a plan, and then there's going to be inputs from the enemy that cause me to make decisions that deviate from that. And how do I get those to other people? And then inversely, what's happening to the people that are on my left and right, causing them to deviate from that? And I think my experience in warfare was always just it's just utter chaos, that you're always trying to manage just a massive amount of data and extrapolate how that ties into what you're trying to accomplish as far as the mission.
Yeah, in my experience, uh, combat boils things down to its most simple form. Um, we used to laugh, being over in Iraq and Afghanistan was actually a lot simpler than living back home. Um, you got your meals each day, and you got some rack, and otherwise you just focused on the mission. And I know that we're going to talk a lot about technology, but in the last analysis, a lot of the widgets and the gadgets just don't really matter, actually. It's more about, all right, what do I need right now and to win this gunfight uh, and get through it. And then you deal with whatever Murphys come along during the gunfight that you got to deal with afterwards. But that was my experience in as far as the mechanics of it. And then the last thing I'll say is pushing information all the way down to the lowest levels so that the lowest levels can make the best decisions at the tactical level. And I'll pause there.
I thought what Earl and John said was spot on. If I just add to it, is that the chaos that happens in combat is a real thing, and the fog of war is a real thing, and that you have to make life or death decisions with very imperfect information, and then move on, right? Like you can't dwell on whether you did the exact right thing or not. And then triage. So you always have to address the biggest problem first, and then work your way down to be really successful. And then finally, that people are the most important thing. Like John said, it's like you could have all the best equipment in the world, but it's the guys to your left and your right that really make the difference, especially in combat.
When you joined the military, what was really state of the art then? When you left, what did that same capability look like? And also, was there even, for instance, like a piece of gear or technology you remember being skeptical about that ended up changing everything? Or conversely, like one that was really hyped up, but essentially became useless on the battlefield?
When I first joined, I shared a Vietnam Arrow night scope with a buddy of mine. So if we were walking around, we would take turns looking at it, kind of look at what the terrain looked like, and then we would try to navigate it. And we had two maps in my infantry platoon. The platoon commander had a map, and then the platoon sergeant had a map. And we might get to see the map to actually see where we were at, maybe once or twice a day. Inversely, by the time I retired 2 years ago, everybody had dual tube white phosphorus night vision that had augmented reality into it. That just like a video game, the good guys had little blue balls floating over them, and even if I couldn't see where they were at, I could see where they were located as far as in my vision. And I had a computer on my chest that not only had the map of where we were at, it had little dots for where all of my soldiers were, and we could even put the enemy on that thing. And if I didn't like the way the map looked, I could actually scroll through and look at aerial imagery. So when you look at, we from World War II to Korea, we basically had the exact same equipment inside of one career in the global war on terror. I went from paper maps and sharing night vision to having Call of Duty amounts of technology on me that gave me prolific essay for what was going on around me. And what was it? And then for me, overhyped technology. I think we're always getting the best rifle and the best optic on it. I every time we've got this new whiz bang bullet that's always supposed to be this big increase in lethality, it's never really been that impactful. I truly believe that if you've taken all of the advanced rifles and optics away from my guys and given us the AK-47s the Taliban had, and you gave them our rifles, they're still going to lose that gunfight every time. We spent a ton of money getting these exquisite systems, and it's really just the training and the discipline that we had that's very combat effective. The rifle is nice to have, but it's just never been that big game changer. And I think that back to my having essay on the battlefield and being able to see where the enemy is, or when my guys have it, every guy having a radio and having a precise map where he can communicate each formation of the enemy, and allowing the lowest levels of a formation to reach up and out and grab supporting arms. When you think about a battle, shooting a guy is great, but calling your buddy that's sitting on a cannon and having him shoot at him so that he's killed before he even gets a chance to fire at you is much more effective. So I think the proliferation of radios and good mapping into the lowest levels of the military, that's been a huge game changer on the battlefield. The youngest guy on my team would be able to communicate with an F-35 and get ordnance onto the battlefield. And when you compare him to me coming in and most of the day I didn't even know where I was at. I was just following the people in front of me. I think that's been the big game changer. Is just getting that information from where the enemy's at and what he's attempting to doing up and out to the supporting systems that are on the battlefield with you is much more deadly than a $10,000 rifle.
Eric, what are your thoughts here, especially just experiencing everything you've seen more recently, even what's happened with Ukraine being called sort of the first drone war? What are you seeing that you wish you've had? Like, what's overhyped? Would love to hear your experiences here.
It really is. It's drones and imagery. So 20 years ago, when I went to Iraq, you'd ask for support for imagery or observation of a target, ISR, and you get like a green dart or something that had very limited photographic and like infrared capability, very grainy, like you could barely make out the things that you really wanted to see. And progress over the course of this last 20 years or so, for instance, that you get MQ1s, MQ9s, and that really lets you see exactly what you need to see. So you're going in not blind to a target. And that I can't stress enough how much of a benefit that is. At one point in time at the National Mission Force, I had up to 6 MQ9s over one specific target and target area, which gives you an understanding of what's happening in that place, who's going to be there, who won't be there, the best way into a particular compound. that gives you a massive advantage. And then imagery as well. When I first, like I said, 20 years ago in Iraq, we were using a thing called Falcon View to navigate to target, and that would be equivalent of like driving to target using MapQuest and printed directions, right? To then Earl's point, you have it right on your chest, a mini computer. We can see exactly where you are, where all your guys are, and where all the vehicles are, which is a massive benefit as well, because it takes a lot of the guesswork out, and when you're trying to create that blue force picture or where your friendlies are at. And then things I guess I've tried and kind of threw away. Like frankly, there's been so many of them. Like I wouldn't even be able to get to list them off. Yeah, I wouldn't even be able to list them off. That's over to John.
One thing I'd like to touch on is it's two halves of the same walnut. And there's been a few acronyms thrown out there. When Earl says essays, meaning situational awareness. And I heard blue force tracking. What he's saying there, what Eric is saying there is being able to see your fellow soldiers, your fellow friendly forces, blue force tracking versus a red force. What I'd say is there's a challenge in the modern era since really about 2004, 2006, but really since about 2011, 13, when networking went down all the way to the individual. The original question was, when you came into the military, what did you see? What did you deal with? And networking wasn't a thing whatsoever in the mid to late 90s. I remember getting the first GPS in our platoon, and it was like, I don't need it. I got a map and compass. And my point is you discounted it. And then fast forward 15 years to about 2011 or 12 when Delta developed TAC, which is it's C4I. I can't remember what C4I is. Command Control Communications and something else. And TAC, what Eric is talking about is a computer on your chest. It basically shows you where everybody is, and you can message together. This was 15 years between a GPS, one per platoon, and every guy having total situational awareness. In other words, networked all the way down to the individual. But here's the challenge. The same is true in reverse. There's a phrase that I always roll my eyes at when I hear commanders say, well, I've commanded so many missions from the center, which is typically code for from the rear. Part of the problem with all the networking is that you push, or it's very easy to push decision-making higher and higher and higher when it should be going lower and lower and lower, ideally. So it's a dilemma. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge of the modern era. You didn't deal with that 20 and 30 years ago, because once a platoon or a company was out, or a squad or a team, they were gone. You might have a sat radio, you might have a sat phone, usually not. They were gone. They were making their decisions. Now it's networked all the way down to the individual, which is great. But that also gives commanders higher and higher an ability to reach down and micromanage.
We're talking about things like ISR, comms, GPS, precision fires, drones, biometrics. Like these are all technologies that everyone's talking about. Like what has actually changed the character of war, and what's just made the same fight faster? What are your thoughts here?
Well, I mean, I'll tie it. Commanders fall in love with this information, and they, all of them have been on the battlefield. They've all been the door kicker guy, and to John's point, they fall in love with these data streams. They love having ISR, and they love being able to watch this. And we kind of got caught in some strange think. We were really trying to solve this problem, and I really had questions about who this was for. To a point, we were trying to get snipers looking through their scopes on the enemy, catch that video, and push it back so that the people at the command and control centers could see what he was looking at and give him authority to fire. And my question, which was shared, was if you can't trust him to pull the trigger at the right time, this isn't a technology solution. This is either a trust issue or this is a training issue. And then as we see, we put all these systems out, in my opinion, and to the military's opinion, as a detriment now. We got really got really comfortable pushing data. Um, the entire global war on terror, we had all these systems. We're pushing video, we're receiving video. Inversely, when you go onto the battlefield in Ukraine, uh, if you push any kind of data streams like that, artillery rounds and drones are going to start falling on you instantly. So we fell in love with our commanders really having this innate understanding of what precisely was occurring tactically, to our detriment, because we built all these systems, where you need these different levels of commanders to approve things. And on the modern battlefield, that's not a counterterrorism war, when you're going against a near peer adversary that can see in the electromagnetic spectrum, you can't use any of those systems. And they also, those, R&D costs money. These systems end up on, carrying weight, consuming energy that the operator has to support with batteries or other means. But to me, it was kind of a technological dead end that we just don't need to push two ways with this information. Having the operator know what's going on is great. Having him be able to communicate where the enemy is and what they're doing is great. But as far as pushing, aliens amounts of video and sound back so that people that aren't involved in the battlefield can see it, I think it was really a waste, and we spent a ton of money doing it. And if we had adopted it, we'd still have to get rid of it, because once you start pushing that data, you're going to get those tactical level units are going to get killed because they're just emitting too much spectrum that can be seen and attacked.
Hmm. Is there something that Silicon Valley consistently, or just like technologists consistently get wrong about what operators actually need downrange?
Uh, yeah, yes, they consistently kind of, and it's the information they're exposed to. So they see movies, and even a very realistic movie just gives you a bad impression of what we actually need. And they always play up these weird problems, and you can always tell they solve a problem that nobody really asked for. Nobody that I've ever spoken with wanted, more tasks on the battlefield or more weight to carry. And so when you bring a system in and you're going to ask somebody to carry it around, maintain it, and at least pay attention to it, it's really got to be of value, and it's got to really impact the battlefield. And a lot of the things that they bring are just neat. And it's always heartbreaking to talk to an engineer, or a team that's spent, even on the light end, a year or two, building something, and you're like, this is, I don't want this. I'd rather bring an extra pair of socks than your widget. And so I think and the industry's getting a lot better at it, is bringing an operator in and then putting him in the room with your engineers and your design team, and be like, would you want this? And if he makes a funny face at you, dig into that, exactly why you're solving the problem incorrectly.
Eric, I have a question for you. You've been in the room where founders walk up to you with prototypes. If a founder right now walked up to you tomorrow with a prototype, like what's the first question you would ask them?
Oh, geez. I mean, that kind of depends on what it'd be basically just like, what problem are you solving for would be the first question I would ask them, right? Because kind of, as Earl alluded to it, a lot of times more is not necessarily better, right? And for the example that we spoke of with your ATAC device or your cell phone on your chest, that you're able to watch and see where all of your personal forces are, and there's a myriad of other things that it can do for you. I had to remind myself to not get sucked into that particular device, because the actual fight is going on around me, right? You need to have your situational awareness in the real world and not on the thing on your chest, right? So that's just an example of what problem are you trying to solve for would be the first thing I'd ask them.
The military is gigantic, and the jobs that are out there there's a prolific amount of jobs. So when you are doing something, you're trying to bring some technology to the battlefield. Who are you supporting? So every unit has a doctrinal task. There's a doctrinal task that they solve, and maybe you're touching the wrong part of the military. So like, look in, see the mission that these people are solving, and you may have a great idea, and you'll get your feelings hurt because somebody will be like, yeah, I don't need that thing. walk over to the Navy side and guys that live on ships all day, this could be the perfect thing that they need. So before you're going to solve problems, you understand what the doctrinal tasks are, and if you look into that, those are all, you can easily see what they are. And I always tie it to the easiest side. The Marine Corps infantry, their task is to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. If you got really cool socks that make your feet not stink, that's neat. Somebody might want those. It's probably not those guys. They don't care. But understanding where in the military you think your idea is going to have bite, and it might not always be the flashy units that you're looking for, but like understanding what problem set each branch and unit has before you start solving problems, because a lot of times I take guys, hurt their feelings. Nobody wants this here, but why don't we go over to the Coast Guard? They have that problem. So, and that's another thing. We just, if you don't know, you don't know. But there's so many jobs in the military that need their tasks made easier with some kind of new technology. It just might not be the actual warfighter that's closing with the enemy, and that's the one that captures everybody's imagination.
John, talk to us a little bit about operator, program manager, requirements writer. Like, where does the disconnect happen? Maybe just build a little bit more on what Earl just mentioned and talk to us about that.
So the disconnect typically happens between industry and you got industry on the one side, of course, you got the end user on the other side of the spectrum, end user being whatever the problem's lowest end user would be. To Eric's point, what is the problem being, who is being served by the solution you're bringing to the problem? My experience is you've got the end users, you got the industry, and in the middle you have the money people and the budgets and the comptrollers and the contracting office that manages the contracts. That is who makes these decisions 9 times out of 10. What I've always said when I'm selling product to the military, I'd say to the guys, fellas, write a requirement, even if it's half a page, and take it over and hand walk it to the contracting office or to your commander anyway, your chain of command, and try to get that requirement for the problem that you're trying to solve into the hands of the contracting office with a little bit of weight behind it, because it's the contracting office, the comptroller who's managing the money and all those folks in the middle who you need their approval to make that purchase, all the way up and down the chain. Those are the people that are actually making the hard decisions about what's being purchased and not. The end users, though, I will say, that's where you're going to get your best feedback on your user interface and your user experience. So if you can get in front of them, great. And if you can find out that they really want it, that's great too. But what's even better is getting the people in the middle to approve the funding and the purchase.
In the past, they called it top-down procurement. So the military would buy a thing and then push it down and give it to the operator or the soldier. And if it didn't quite fit into what you were doing, you just changed how you did it to facilitate the material solution. SOCOM has always been a bottom-up procurement model where, to John's point, you find a guy and he's like, I have this problem and I need this solution. And then the enterprise would go and find that for you. And the rest of the military has really noticed that we're getting the material solution that we actually want, and they keep getting it wrong. So there's been a big shift, especially under Secretary Hegseth, to take that SOCOM procurement model and figure out how to overlay that for the entire military. Not that you can have a guy pick out what kind of submarine we should procure, but get the feedback on what they're actually doing, the problems that they're having, and use that before you go out and buy a thing and then make them use it.
So the tech is changing roughly every 5 years now, but the one thing that hasn't changed is being a warfighter. Would love for you to touch on what about being a warfighter has not changed, and also how do you even think about training judgment, not just skill, especially if you think about having, say, enlisted 20-year-old today is probably going to have more lethal tech at his fingertips than a battalion commander had in 1991. How do you think about that as well?
I think that hasn't changed is the people, right? Like And I would make the argument that like the tech that we have within the United States is good, but it's the people that makes us the um, best military in the world. I mean, if you go back to the two soft truths, the first two soft truths are that people are more important than hardware, and that quality is better than quantity, right? So I think that that's something that has not changed and will not change, no matter how much tech we begin to use as a military force in general.
I'll add to what Eric said, by saying that, and it's not really tech related, but ethics and morality still applies, and that's not necessarily whether I should, pull a trigger or not. Sometimes the ethical and the moral thing to do is to pull the trigger. That's what your job is to do. And those are human decisions that technology really should never and can never replace. And Eric has said it. People are the most important thing, and so it's truly it's an important thing to develop people that are going to be doing the war fighting, because the machines will not replace the ethics and the morality.
Given that comment, how do you think about AI, autonomy, human in the loop? I think very hot topics today. Um, where do you want AI making a call faster than a human can? Where do you absolutely not want AI involved? Is human in the loop still meaningful at machine speed, or is it becoming more, um, call it comforting fiction here?
AI would be an awesome tool to use for things like a drone swarm attack or a base defense or something where the risk of human life is not at risk at stake, I guess, by that AI decision. But it could potentially save human lives by acting faster than a human can really make in that decision loop if something's happening that quickly. I don't think that AI should be used in something that's going to cause the loss of human life right now. Maybe if you meet threshold, and then it can begin to kind of take over the decision process, but a human has to make the final decision that AI will ultimately take that control from the human.
For me, I think AI, its place on the battlefield. The easy metric is anywhere where the human in the loop is going to cause casualties on our side. So everybody likes to use the hypersonic missile. So things like that are easy. And I think the must have, it's a nice to have for those defensive systems to preserve U.S. lives. But the must have is on the network defense. If your network is being attacked by a hostile AI, having a human in the loop, it's just not going to be fast enough. And we covered all these exquisite systems where we're hyper reliant on these networks. If an enemy AI came in and destroyed those, and you're waiting on a human to play that piece, I think you're guaranteeing failure. So, especially in cyber warfare, AI has to have pretty free reign, especially in the defensive side. And I'm pretty, to me, AI it's like a attack dog. It's if we're giving it the right rules and programming in its left and right limits and giving it room to execute. Um, to me, our job is killing the enemy. When we go to war, it's awful. We've already failed every other solution. The best way to fight a war is to get it over with as quickly as possible. So if you can get AI on the battlefield, killing the enemy, as long as it's following moral and ethical guidelines, I'd say bring it up and get it as far forward as possible. I just don't see the difference between giving AI permission to kill the enemy and it does it without your say so. To say, firing off a guided munition that's looking for a picture of the enemy that you gave it. I just don't see the moral difference between those two. I don't see the moral difference between that and then telling AI this type of enemy, if they're in this area, kill them.
Do you have any thoughts on more broadly uncomfortable truths about where U.S. capability gaps are right now?
Iran perfectly demonstrated some uncomfortable truths. Is that as long as and I liken the conflict that we just fought to the British complaining that the Americans won't stand in straight lines. The Iranians knew that they were never going to be able to match us with their air force or navy, so they just completely did not fight that fight. They bought cheap drones, and we were shooting $1 million missiles at $30,000 drones, and we knew they were going to do that. We really didn't take any meaningful action to fight the fight. So while we were still successful, obviously, it wasn't strictly because of the military option. It was the full diplomatic, economic, and military pressure that's put them in the position they are. But if we didn't have those other levers, I really think that buying these really high-end systems was really kind of a farce. If you're bombing something with $1 million cruise missile that costs $100,000, that's not a great exchange. So I think the uncomfortable truth is that we built all these gleaming systems, and the enemy just decided not to show up and stand in a straight line for us.
Eric, having just most recently commanded SEAL Team 1, if you had a blank check and a full authority for 1 year, what's the first thing you would fix about DFW right now?
Our ability to affect change within our own system is one of our, you mentioned capability gaps. Holistically, that's a capability gap within our military and probably our government in general. And I think they're doing that a little bit. They're doing it better currently, but it's certainly not perfect. And our ability to John mentioned like our contracting process previously, there as a team commander or deputy commander, I can't tell you how many times I had guys come up to me with the exact thing that they wanted to buy, like the exact piece of equipment that would fill the gap that they were trying to solve for. And then you take it to the contracting office, and you're a lot of times you're forced to bid it out for 3 bids, and then the thing actually goes to the lowest bidder. So you get a product that's similar to what you actually wanted, but it's not the thing that you actually wanted. So then you end up trying to solve for that gap over and over and over again. I would probably redo the entire military contracting system to make it much, much easier to buy the things that the end user actually wants.
John, anything that gives you hope? What gives you hope?
Gives me hope. Well, I would say that the wars against Hezbollah and Iran, which is really the same thing, gives me hope. By which I mean, the Israeli strike using the pagers against Hezbollah is arguably the most innovative special operation in the history of the world. It's truly, it was, if anybody's interested, yeah, look it up. The tactics that in the year, it took 5 years to put that operation together. And they took out mostly all of the, leadership of Hezbollah in one strike. The same but different with Iran. And this goes back to another question I think you just asked, Ernestine, is you've got a country 4 times the size of Iraq and 80% mountainous. It's a huge country. And yet in a matter of weeks, their Navy and Air Force is effectively gone. At least their traditional Air Force, but even their UAV their drone capabilities are hugely reduced. So that gives me hope on the battlefield. I mean, the American strike power, and of course the Hezbollah strike by the Israelis. I mean, this is just amazing use of technologies to essentially decimate enemies very, very quickly. Okay, but let's talk about the other side of that equation briefly. And when it gets into near peer and peer enemies, I would argue Iran was a near peer, arguably, and they were taken out very quickly. But what does that say? What message does that send to the peers, China specifically, is that the Americans can destroy you very, very quick, and they come after your command and your control, your very expensive equipment. So we have to do that to them first. And so you get into this scenario that the war, the world hasn't seen total war since 1945, arguably except in Gaza. Gaza's destroyed. It's completely rubbled. And so then you have to say, well, these things that have now taken place just in the last 6 months give me hope. It also leads me to concern because it's accelerating the pace of war. And when you have a national means to create, to strike an enemy as fast as we struck Iran or as Israel struck Hezbollah, you have to assume they will. And so that leads to my concern. So I'll pause there.
Let's wrap with just one final question for me. So, Earl, you're a Medal of Honor recipient. John, 2 decades of ultra high risk Delta deployments. Eric, commanding a SEAL team, completely different paths, all incredible accomplishments. We alluded to briefly the warrior ethos. What's a common thread you each look for in the people next to you, the people you surround yourself with?
I look for a humble team player. And we've got all these metrics where, you have an ultra high performer, low trust guy, not worth it. But I look for a guy that's when he's working, he finishes his stuff. The first thing he does is pivot over and help somebody without being asked to. I just look for a guy that's always looking with his eye on not what his tasks are, but what the team's goals are, so that as he creates slack, he can help somebody pull on their rope. So that's something I'm always keeping my eye out for. And I just, I've had a observation over the years that, cowardice on the battlefild is always, can you really know? And one thing I've consistently seen is that a selfish person always ends up being cowardly. To a point, I just really say that selfishness is the precursor to cowardice. And so when I'm watching a group of guys, when I see somebody that really takes care of themselves and then kind of goes into half throttle, that's the first person I get rid of. And the guy that's, working late, helping somebody, even though it's not directly benefiting him, but it's a part of being that team. That's the guy I always want, even if he maybe runs a little slower and reads with his mouth open. That's the guy.
So, so kind of what Earl said. When I'm looking for a good teammate, number one, I'm looking for trust, right? Because trust is paramount when building a team. If you don't trust your teammates, then you can't truly perform to your utmost potential as a team. Selflessness, kind of an example of that is in the SEAL teams. We always say the order of precedence when you come back from operations: team gear, my gear, me. So team gear being everything that's used by the entire team, whether it's the vehicles or the large radios or whatever it might be. My gear is my own personal radios and what rifle and kind of everything that keeps me alive. Then finally, the last thing that gets taken care of is me, and it kind of builds you. It's an awesome reminder of how you are the least important thing to that actually to the team itself, for that thing to function how it's supposed to. And then just thinking about it, when you asked that question, at development group, we screen for kind of innate intelligence, problem solving capability, leadership potential, and then above all else, character. And that's kind of the metric for a good teammate, I think.
That was a pretty good rundown, Eric. The only thing I can add to that is common sense.
Earl, Eric, and John, thanks for joining. And you may get tired of hearing it, but just thanks for all you've done for all of us and your critical roles. John, great to see you again. And I'll just all over a map here. John Kuhn was literally the original Hacking for Defense team. So the whole lineage of the whole course goes back to John Kuhn, who I met when he was still in active duty. I think you were still in the unit, John, when we got connected and you were coming to Stanford. But you brought so much to the campus and so many of your successors that I got to work with. But it's a real treat to see, some of America's finest here and off the battlefield doing great work in different capacities. You can't maybe tell from the screen here, but I got a few gray hairs. So I go way back in the military myself. Served in Rangers and Special Forces community back in literally a previous millennia. But I mean, just the quality of those serving, you just can't overstate it, and the quality of those leading those amazing soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines is just extraordinary. You had a chance to see some of them here tonight. So I hope everyone is inspired by that. Technology is going to change, but leadership and warrior ethos is going to be enduring. And thankfully we have professionals like the folks you just heard today. And I'm sure they'll all agree that, boy, we're in good hands.